this is a story of, we all know the journalist Toby Young. He's associate editor of The Spectator, and I've known him quite a long time, and he's, ever since I've known him, and probably before, he's always been trying to set up organisations that improve people's lives. And so, for example, he was very disappointed with the lowering of standards in schools, and so he helped found the first free school in West London. And in 2020, he set up the Free Speech Union, which was to help defend people threatened with cancellation.
I've actually been helped by that, funnily enough.
And I've had a long conversation about an incident that happened to me. Mm-hmm. And his website, the Daily Skeptic, is a news and commentary website born out of all the misinformation and disinformation and censorship, especially by big tech, that emerged during COVID. But now, if you talk to Toby, he's actually quite he's just like a sort of bog standard centre-right, old school conservative. Mm. He thinks we should have state education. He thinks we should have the NHS. He's not like a rabid libertarian like yours truly. But I guess because he's an intellectual force, or for whatever reason, he is absolutely loathed by his ideological enemies. I mean, really despised. And they work tirelessly to bring him down. And time again, he lost something like 5 jobs in 2016 because of what he calls offence archaeologists digging up stuff that he'd said, 15 or 20 years ago, quoting it out of context and then being offended. So that's Toby. And last week, PayPal, he got an email out of the blue from PayPal, and it closed his personal account for breaching its acceptable use policy. And then barely a few minutes later, he got an email that PayPal had closed down the account of the Daily Skeptic, the news and commentary website. And then a few minutes after that, it closed down the accounts for the Free Speech Union. Now, this is no small disruption because, if you think how many hours and days and months and years it takes to build up a following and build up a subscriber base, and I think something like a quarter of the Daily Skeptic's revenue comes via PayPal, and according to Young, a third of the Free Speech's Union's members pay their dues via PayPal. And now, I'm going to quote Young now. He said, "I did some Googling, and I discovered that numerous organisations and individuals with dissident political views have had their accounts closed down by PayPal recently, particularly over 3 issues you're not allowed to be sceptical about: the lockdown policy and other COVID restrictions, the mRNA vaccines, and the climate emergency. The Daily Skeptic frequently publishes issues on these subjects, and the Free Speech Union may have fallen foul of another taboo, which is defending people who've got into trouble with HR departments for expressing their gender-critical views." Now, we learned today that there's a parent group called Us for Them, which campaigned to keep schools open during the pandemic.
Good on them.
They've been shut down as well. And now, how is PayPal able to do this without warning? Because it can. Because it's a private company, it does what it like. If it wants to shut down your account, it can. Did the same to WikiLeaks in 2010. I mean, that must have been under enormous pressure from the United States government to close it down, because WikiLeaks was a huge threat. All the information it was disclosing. And unfortunately, this always makes me laugh, this massively backfired, because people then started donating to WikiLeaks using Bitcoin. And because of the enormous appreciation in Bitcoin that happened since 2010, it's turned WikiLeaks into one of the most richest organisations there is, assuming they kept some of their Bitcoins, which I gather they have. Now, the PayPal founder, Peter Thiel, massive libertarian, wrote one of the great essays about libertarianism in 2008. I quote it all the time, and I've now forgotten the title. And he's probably on the same philosophical side of the argument as Toby Young is.
I have some severe reservations about him.
Maybe you do. First and foremost, though, he is a businessman. And PayPal will do whatever is asked of it in order to survive. And particularly when it started out, it was seen as a huge money laundering tool, cross-national payments. And in order to survive as a business, it had to demonstrate that it would not be a vehicle for money laundering and criminal activity, any kind of illicit activity. And so now PayPal is really, really stringent in who you can pay money to when you're trying to withdraw money to. Like, for example, if I get paid in US dollars and I keep the US dollars in my PayPal account and I want to withdraw the US dollars and not pay PayPal Forex charges.
Yeah.
So say I wanted to withdraw it to my Revolut account, which I can keep US dollars in. I can't do that with PayPal. I can only withdraw the money in the currency of where I'm from. And so that means I've got to pay PayPal's ludicrous Forex charges.
Foul of that before
which,
myself.
anyway, Thiel's no longer PayPal's CEO. And like so much of big tech, what started out one way as censorship-free, free speech, all that, by its founders, it's just gone somewhere else. And this is evidenced by all the censorship that goes on. And it seems that, Delingpole's forever saying this, James Delingpole, that the middle and upper management of big tech has been infected by people on the other side of the culture war to where we are. Let's just put it that way. So that's what's happened. Now, there's a bigger theme at play here. And this is just an example of something much bigger. And it's deeply concerning. And that is, I've, in everything, practically every article I've ever written, every book I've ever written, my core argument has always been, we need to separate money and state.
Yep.
At the moment, money is an issuance of the state. And worse than that, it has become a tool of government. So whether it's suppressing interest rates to boost the housing market and maintain popularity, printing money to bail out banks, or indeed the entire economy during COVID, or freezing the accounts of political enemies, the truckers in Canada, or Russia, the entire Russia, finance is being weaponized.
Yes.
And governments weaponize money. Like, they'll always go to collect taxes that are easy to collect, and taxes that are hard to collect, they tend not to pursue. That's why.
You can see that with the new IRS agents. Did you see their training exercise by any chance?
No.
So they've just hired 87,000 IRS agents. They've armed them to the teeth. The training exercise wasn't breaking down Jeff Bezos' door, for example. It was breaking down the door of a small business owner who had forgotten to claim a lawnmower on his tax receipt. And they were arresting him for that.
You see that like mad in HMRC here as well. They'll go for the small business and they'll leave big tech, globalized, whatever.
Yeah,
alone.
that's why there's so few police officers on the streets, but the parking attendants are plenty. They're three to the road.
Yeah, and it's also a lot easier to police Twitter than it is knife crime.
Yes.
But anyway, and it's one reason income tax is so high. Income tax is an easy tax collect. You go to the employer. If you do not collect this tax for us, you go to jail. So the employer does the job for them. Now, governments weaponize money because it's an easy tool for them to get the results they want. It's a lot easier to sanction Russia and freeze its accounts and confiscate its money than it is to go to war with Russia. It's a lot easier to cut off the truckers' funding than it is to confront them. It's a lot easier and quicker to print the money you need to bail out the banking system than it is to collect that money in taxes. If it had to collect that money in advance in taxes, there would be no QE.
Or just spend responsibly in the first
Well,
place.
that was and in another age, that's what rulers would have had to do if they wanted to spend money. They had to collect it in taxes. It's a lot easier to suppress interest rates and collect the inflation tax than it is to impose direct taxes or rein in spending. Inflation tax is a stealth tax. Milton Friedman used to call it taxation without legislation. Now, the irony of such actions is that, as with WikiLeaks, they will accelerate the adoption of censor-free non-state alternatives, of which Bitcoin is the most obvious example.
Yep.
The US, by confiscating Russian assets and freezing it out of the banking system, is going to accelerate the development of a non-US international system of money for the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, the SCO, which is basically every country from west of Japan to east of Ukraine.
Yep.
All the stands and all that. And there's going to be it's going to accelerate the adoption of a challenger to the US dollar.
Along the digital Silk Road that they've built up with their Belt and Road Initiative.
And there's an actual Silk Road that they've built up, and there are train lines they're all building and all the rest.
140 countries at this point. It's insane.
It's enormous. Territorially, I think it's like 40%. It's 30% of world GDP and 40% of world landmass, or something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers. Now, so this weaponization of money, in the long term, it may backfire, but in the short term, it works, and government thinks in the short term. And it shuts off funding taps, and it creates considerable hardship and inconvenience. Now, I use PayPal all the time. It's convenient. I use it as a buyer as I use it as seller, but I should really switch to another payment provider.
The Dan Bongino has launched one which Tim Pool's show is using the infrastructure of. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'm sure a viewer will put it in.
I'm sure, and Stripe's really good. None of the others are as censorious as PayPal, but if they're pressured, you can be sure they will be, because they will need to survive as a business. And now, what gets me really concerned is, as we're now moving towards central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, this weaponization of money is going to get a lot more intense. Now, I'm just going to change tack slightly. I've still got another 5 minutes or so.
That's fine, yeah, of course you do.
So, when one body in a society has the power to print money, to create money at no cost to itself, it is inevitable that that body will have disproportionate power within the society. So you and I, we can't create money. We have to work and expend energy to get money. A government can just print it. Now, if you are looking for one explanation as to how it is the state in the West has grown so enormous, it's something like 50% of GDP now. It's certainly 50% of tax revenue by the time you factor in inflation. At the turn of the 20th century, it was just 10%. If you're looking for one reason, it is our system of fiat money. It is the zero patient zero. Money is the blood of an economy. And if you want to understand the inequality gap, why young people can't afford a house, all of that, look no further than our system of money. Why Western families are so small. The primary reason given is always we would have a bigger family if we could afford it.
Yep.
But most can't, because they've got this enormous cost of government in their lives.
That's
Only
how
the
I'm
very
feeling.
bottom. Of course you are. You can't afford a house. You can't start a fat. How old are you?
23.
23?
Yeah.
I thought so well read. I thought you were about 10 years older. But anyway, the only people who can afford to have big subsidies are either those in welfare at the very bottom or the very rich. 90% in the middle can't. And so instead of having big families, we import our youth from abroad.
Yes.
And we import a load of other problems with them. And then we can't understand why British values are being eroded and disappearing.
Yeah, especially with the resentful underclass whose only attachment to the country is an economic one.
There you go. And so it all comes back to our system of money. And, you know, in 1971, that was the big turning point, because that was when America came off the gold standard. You know, you could afford a house for 3 times your earnings.
Yep.
You just can't now.
It's like The Simpsons. Homer Simpson is a working class guy. He doesn't do a particularly technical job at the nuclear power plant, but he has a very large detached house to support 2 pets and 3 kids on a single income. And that was expected. And then now...
It's normal. Houses don't cost a lot of money to build. And we all think it's because we don't build enough. It's not. It's if you measure inflation by money supply growth rather than by the cost of a few consumer goods, the housing has gone up by as much as the money supply has increased.
Yeah, it's now
and it's
10
because
times the average income.
And more. And it's you create you print and you create money, and most of it, because debt is how you create money, and mortgages is how most debt is created. It all goes into real estate. Now, of course, some states are more benign than others, and our 21st century social democracies, for all their woeful waste, are preferable to many of the governing systems elsewhere in the world, in other more tyrannical corners. But the damage done has still been enormous, and we are careering towards a far more nefarious destination. And that is why I am such, and have always been such, a proponent of non-state money, gold and Bitcoin. And it's also why the prospect of central bank digital currencies, which, by the way, I think are inevitable
Yep.
because technology is destiny. They fill me with such bread because programmable money, we're already in the weaponization of finance, but programmable money is just going to give governments even more control and influence. Now, your every transaction can be monitored, and that's like Orwellian surveillance states. Certain transactions can be outlawed. If you're not a government-approved buyer or a seller, then you can't transact with that person. Taxes and fines can just be removed from your account without your approval. And you know what it's like when a utility company takes a bill from you and they take it out wrong and then you try and get the money back. It's a nightmare. It takes months. Imagine trying to get it back from the government. And they're going to give huge scope to behavioural economists who all share that top-down status, we know better than you worldview. The ministries of nudges around the world, you're going to be goaded into all sorts of decisions you might not otherwise have made.
Sage has just set up a climate change advisory policy group, so they've moved on from pandemics now to there.
Well, this is really interesting because social credit systems are coming.
Yes.
And are you a good citizen? Then you get the favourable rate of interest,
Yes.
you get the good loan deal, you get the incentives. Do you articulate wrong thought on the internet? Are you cynical about this climate emergency narrative? Did you have the vaccine? You know, like we asked you to. And if the answer to any of these questions is no, and it will no because it's all going to be in your phone somewhere, you will get less favourable rates and you will become a second-class citizen. If you are a naughty boy, your account might be frozen altogether or suspended for a period, the same way you get suspended on Twitter or something if you utter wrong thing. And we are going to a very, very dangerous place. And, you know, Bitcoin was originally built in reaction to all the money printing that went on in 2008 to bail out the banks. The headline in the very first block in the blockchain, the Genesis block, was Chancellor on brink of second bailout for the banks. It was a reference to the Times headline of that day. And here is a money system that nobody, whether government or hacker or whatever, you cannot print it, you cannot debase it. The rules are set in code. The inflation rate is transparent, it's clearly laid out, it's set in the code. And the system, rather than rely on trust, whether it's in a bank or a central bank or a government or a payment provider, it's based on mathematical proof and computer power, backed up by computer power. So it is apolitical money. It is censorship-resistant money. It is trustless. You don't need to trust in anyone. It is hard money. And this PayPal story, the no platforming of Toby Young, is a very good example of why we need Bitcoin. The standard expression is Bitcoin fixes this. And it really does fix it. And this is the world to which we're heading that I've just described. And there's a very strong use case for Bitcoin. So I urge everyone to own some. You don't have to own a lot. You don't have to risk a lot of money, but familiarize yourself with the tech, get your Bitcoin wallet, be able to transact in non-government monies, because it is one of the few things, it's one of like the few technical areas that can save us from all of this. And it's a largely unregulated space because nobody knows how to regulate what hasn't been invented yet. It's full of invention. It's full of opportunity. And if you want to get really anti-state, look at some of the privacy currencies, Monero, Zcash, Decred, there are others. But I'd be really careful with these because you're on dodgy ground and they could make them illegal at any time. And then just by holding any of these currencies, you're guilty of some kind of crime. And I also find that in terms of price appreciation, the privacy currencies are always a bit of a disappointment. But yeah, I mean, I think I've made my point. We are going to a dangerous place. And it is very worrying, but to a degree, Bitcoin fixes this.
I would urge anyone who would like some more information on Peter Thiel and some of the Silicon Valley CEOs, for example, to check out a deep think on the website called The Real Vampires of Silicon Valley. I won't spoil that. There's also an audio track. And for more information on central bank digital currencies, I would urge people to go and look at my deep think called The WEF's ESGs of the Mark of the Beast. Both of those are very informative. I do have a question quickly for you. I was told recently that Ethereum, which I own a little bit in, has been taken off of proof of stake. And it looks like it's going to be a technology co-opted because unlike Bitcoin, it is manipulable and it can be printed infinitely.
That's absolutely right. It's switched from proof of work to proof of stake.
Yeah.
And this is a tactical decision of its founder, Vitalik.
Difficult name.
What's his second name? I can't remember his second name. Excuse the bad language there. Vitalik Buterin. And he's a massive libertarian, by the way. And he subscribes to that Peter Thiel view that the only space... You can't achieve political change through politics. You have to achieve it through new frontiers and new tech and so on. And him and his advisors, they've decided to go to proof of stake. Now, I'm a big believer in proof of work, but proof of work, like the founder of Ripple, or one of the founders of Ripple, has just given $5 million to Greenpeace to campaign against Bitcoin's proof of work system. Right. So over the next few months, it's already starting. You're going to see all this environmental...
Bitcoin is bad for the planet narrative.
Bitcoin is bad for the planet. Now, actually, what Bitcoin does, there's this idea that if you consume a lot of energy, it is bad. It's not that simple. Human beings consume more energy the more we evolve. And we get better at consuming energy and we consume it more cleanly. Just because you consume a lot of energy doesn't mean you're environmentally unfriendly. And what Bitcoin does is it consumes energy in the most effective way. So Bitcoin mining gravitates to parts of the world where energy is not, it's just sitting there unconsumed and it would otherwise be wasted. So it's, in fact, so for example, when they flare the US, gas things in the oil fields, Bitcoin mining is taking that energy instead, and so it's in fact making more efficient use of energy. And I think something like 70% of Bitcoin energy mining is now renewable, so it makes use of hydroelectricity and all the rest of it. Now, but nevertheless, the argument is embedded in people's heads. Proof of work equals lots of energy consumption equals bad for the planet, and so. I mean, there's already noises about banning Bitcoin mining in North America, and of course Biden hates it. Of course they hate it because it's a challenge. Even Trump was anti-Bitcoin. But anyway, that Ethereum has now gone proof of stake, which centralizes it. And when you centralize something, and I think already the two main miners in the proof of stake are like Coinbase, which is the big wallet provider, and another one.
Which is partnered with the WEF, funnily enough.
Okay, so it is concerning Ethereum, but Buterin is a genius. I mean, I've got some Ethereum, and there are lots of apps built on top of it. And, that's the thing. It's still experimental. Yeah. So we don't know how it's going to end up. But Buterin knows what he's doing. The Bitcoin maximalists will be critical, but there are plenty of Ethereum maximalists that say this is the way to go. So I'm actually going to hedge my bets and say I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that, and as we said, there is a deep think mentioned, so thank you very much to John for pulling that up.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this one on what do the elite actually want. You want to follow what else Josh is putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Josh_firm on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.